I could feel her starting to crown, so I moved back where I was kind of back on my tailbone, my bum kind of, and my legs were open because I wanted to try to catch this one. That was another thing that I had never really done before, and I wanted to experience that. I give one more push, and she's born into the water. The sack broke over her head. I moved it all off her head, and I just brought her to my chest, and it was just magical. It was just so sacred and incredible.
I had my children on the floor. I was on my favourite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realised in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women.
Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears. I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi Sami and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you doing, Anna?
Oh, I'm so great. I've been looking forward to this conversation. There's so many things about your birth stories and just what you're going to share that I just find tickling, like how your grandmother is a midwife and your mother-in-law and how they were your midwives. Oh, that just makes me so happy and I just want to hear everything. And then you've had 5 births. Almost all of them ended up as a home birth. One did transfer. We'll talk about that. And I just feel like there's going to be so much yumminess. And you just told me that you literally started listening to the Natural Birth podcast probably the first week of me actually starting it in 2020, which also is bloody fantastic. So that's so cool. And I need to ask you too, when you started listening, was that your first pregnancy or a second, or where did you start?
That was my third pregnancy when I
Third.
started listening.
Amazing. Oh, beautiful. Because it's 5 years now. So who knows? Like if you were back to back with babies, you could have been one of your early ones.
Mhm.
Well, take us back to obviously becoming pregnant, and because you have home birthing as a part of your family lineage, like your mother home birthed you and your siblings, and your grandmother is a midwife, home birth midwife. Like, was there ever a choice?
I will admit, I remember watching my mother give birth to my youngest brother. I was about 8, maybe 9 years old, and I thought that was really intense. She was very loud. No one had kind of prepared me or talked to me beforehand. And I watched her give birth and I was like, that it was terrible. Who would do that? And so I had a bit of a fear of birth going forward after that. But when the time came, it was no question. It was like, okay, I'm having this baby at home. I need to figure this out because I knew I had some of that fear from watching her birth. And so that was kind of my priority when I got pregnant. My first pregnancy did end in miscarriage. I was dating my ex-husband at the time. I was 20 years old, drinking and smoking, and was shocked to find out I was pregnant. And so that was a kind of reality check. And I lost that baby at about 9 weeks, which was very hard, but it also solidified what I wanted in life. And my ex-husband and I got married a week later. And then we consciously conceived 9 months after that. So and one special point from that miscarriage is I did go to my grandmother to be my midwife. And so I had one appointment with her, and she was just thinking to herself, she's a very inspired woman. And she was thinking, I wonder if Sammy's going to have a girl. And then a voice came to her head that said, I'm a boy. So, and I just trusted that intuition she had. But after the miscarriage, I had this feeling that, and I know every kind of loss can be different, but I had this feeling that that boy was going to come back and he was just waiting for a better time. And so that was really special to me and something I was able to hold on to as the years went by. So that was my first pregnancy.
I love that. How beautiful. And thank you for sharing that because I think it's so important to honor all the spirits that come through, whether they stay a short time, a long time, or if they're birthed or not, alive. I think it's really important that we always honor the ones who want to come through. And Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's 5 weeks or 15 or 25 or 35 when that happens. And
Mhm.
how special to have your grandmother as your midwife. I mean, gosh, I'm just like I just, I don't know words how much I love that in every like bone of
Mhm.
my being. It just feels so ancient and true and beautiful to have someone that you've known your whole life care for you. And I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like that's just how it was also and has been throughout the ages that we knew the midwife of the village. She was kind of like the grandmother of the village, the
Mhm.
wise woman of the village. Maybe she wasn't blood, but you know, that relationship and how beautiful that you've experienced that. And then I also love how you shared that you had fear from watching your mom birth and how important I think the message is to prepare your children and also
Yes.
give them choice. I know like one friend of mine, she had um her daughter, I can't remember what she was, but not teenager, but you know, younger, and then also teenager for the second, I think, or third baby after her, obviously. And
Mhm.
she got the choice, do you want to be or not? And she chose not to be, but come straight after birth to see the baby. And like to have that, I think is really important to like give choice to your kids and to prepare them. Like watch birth videos, listen to birth stories. So
Yes.
that yeah, yeah, so it can be a good experience. Hmm.
No, I completely agree. And just to brag about my family lineage for a second, my grandma started the Midwifery College of Utah. So she was the founder of teaching the women in my home state. And my great grandmother, so her grandmother, was also a midwife. She was called to be a midwife as a member of our religion. It was an extended calling back then in kind of the pioneer days. And so she would travel to homes and she'd stay with them for a week. She'd deliver babies and then she'd clean and cook and, just kind of do that after birth care. And then I also have a great grandmother who was from one of the original colonies after the Mayflower who was also a midwife. She was actually kicked out of her little colony because she was a little too outspoken. After church Sunday meetings, she'd invite people to her house to talk about religion, but it must have been a little threatening for that time. So I can only imagine she was like somewhat of a modern witch of her day, but I've got a rich history of midwives in my family, which I think is just so special. I
Wow.
really appreciate knowing that part of my lineage.
Wow, I wonder if it's going to be your next calling or maybe one of your babes to take that torch and continue.
I feel the call from time to time, but I'm in a very baby heavy
Yeah.
point in my life. So I'm just waiting patiently for when the time comes. So,
Wow, wow. Oof, I get goosebumps because it's truly is a calling. I think it's a calling for so many women, and they might lie
mhm,
dormant until they have their own birth and they get awakened to the power and the beauty and the oh, just the magic of this rite of passage.
yes.
Or even like, you know, I have a lot of maidens coming through to the Sacred Birthworker mentorship, right? Who
Hmm.
already feel the calling before and they want to just learn all the ancient wisdom and the women's wisdom and the embodiment so that when they have babies, they're fully embodied in that going into motherhood. And I love that aspect.
Yes.
Or just being like, I don't, you know, because a lot of people ask me, who are like hesitant, like, oh, is it okay to become a birth worker if you haven't had babies? Like, do you have to have had your own experience? Do you have to be a mother? And no, like, there's so many amazing birth workers that start out first helping in the birth portal before they themselves go into that journey of becoming mother. So, woo,
Yes.
how exciting. Anyways, I can talk about this forever, but we're gonna, we're gonna tap them back into the birth stories. Okay,
Great.
so second pregnancy, take us back.
Okay. So this was a very conscious conception. I felt like there was a spirit baby waiting for me. I got pregnant within the first month of trying. I had been on birth control, and that was a terrible experience. Never again. But within the first month of getting off, I got pregnant. Um, the pregnancy went very smoothly. My mother got hyperemesis, so I remember watching her throw up just for 9 months with every baby, and I was a little worried that I might experience that, but I did not. Just classic nausea, very smooth pregnancy. Um, and my due date was like September 10th, guest date. um, but as I remember, this was the year she was born in 2017. This was the year of the solar eclipse. And I remember I was in my last month of pregnancy and the solar eclipse happened, and I just felt like it was going to happen really soon. And within a week, I had my first glimpse of contractions. Um, but they tapered off very quickly. But I was so excited as a first time mom that I drove to my grandma's house and was like, I'm just going to stay here until the baby comes because I was planning on having the baby at her house. But I ended up just staying there for 5 days with no sign of anything. No more contractions came after that. And I just was feeling ridiculous. I was like, should I just go home? What am I doing? And I actually flipped open my scriptures. I'm a religious woman and I find a lot of insight and inspiration that way. And I basically read off the page. I'm not sure if the word said this directly or not, but it just said, stay where you are. And I just knew I was going to have the baby that night. And would you have it? A thunderstorm rolled in around 9 p.m. We went to the grocery store to get a few snacks, and the contractions started coming in, and they were very consistent, maybe like 10 to 15 minutes apart. And I was just so giddy. I was so excited to have this baby that I'd been anticipating, and I've always known I wanted to be a mom. So we drive back to my grandma's house. I was surrounded by family. My aunts were there. I have one aunt who is also a trained midwife, and another one who is just so special to me. She and I have kids that are about the same age. Oh, and I'll add, I have an aunt who allowed me to attend her birth 6 months prior. And I think that was very influential for preparing me to have my own baby, to witness birth. It was very impactful, very sacred. And after she gave birth, I happened to be the one with the towel for the baby. And so they placed the baby right in my hands first. And I remember just being so in awe at this human that my grandma had to snap at me, put the baby on mom. I mean, she didn't snap rudely or anything. It was just, it brought me back to reality. And of course, I handed the baby to my aunt, but it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever experienced. And so that prepared me for this birth. And that aunt was rubbing essential oils on my feet, and I was just laboring, and they were filling up the birth tub and for me to labor in. And, it was just so fun and exciting. We were all just kind of hanging out. I love being around family. Every birth, if I could choose, has been a family affair, just surrounded by people that love me.
That's how it should be.
Yeah. And the more people, the better for me. So several hours go by. It gets to about midnight, and my grandma's like, we're just going to keep watching you. The contractions are pretty consistent, but nothing crazy. Oh, I skipped a part. She checked me, and this was my first baby. And so I didn't really know what to expect. So I consented to being checked just to get an idea. And I was 4 centimeters. And so she just decided, we'll just let you labor throughout the night. We'll keep an eye on you. And actually, everyone went to bed except my husband. And I was like, everyone's gone. Like, I actually felt a little abandoned at that point in time because everyone was so relaxed. But I got through it. I had some playlists that I had made, and my grandma came back to check me around 4 a.m. and I was still 4 centimeters. And the baby's head was pressing on my cervix. So the opening to the cervix was tucked behind the baby's head. If I'm remembering correctly, this is my first baby, so it's been a bit. And so we decided that she would go in and pull the cervix forward. So the pressure was at the opening, but it wasn't fun.
No.
It was
horrible.
so
violent.
But I wanted to have the baby, so I was willing to do whatever it took at that point. So she pulled the cervix forward, and then they also decided to break my waters to get things going because the bag was bulging. And I can't remember all the context of this, but it was my first baby. And so I just really trusted the people around me, and I don't regret that decision. And my grandma has a specific way of doing things that I've learned in later births that I can disagree with her, and that's okay. And that doesn't make her any less or any more. I can trust my intuition, but it took a couple births for me to really tap into that. I
Mm.
think.
Oh, I love that piece of wisdom. And yeah, like a part of me went like, "Ooh, cringe, cringe." But that's the thing. It's like you like so many other women, wherever you birth, the first baby, and especially if you have a trusted like grandmother, how hard is it to say
Yes.
no to your grandma? Of course, that's going to probably be a process. And also
Hmm.
just not knowing yourself. And, of course, in that scenario, you probably could have just labored and had your baby a few hours probably later without that
Hmm.
kind of intervention. But at the same time, you had a trusted, beloved elder who said, let's do this. This is going to help you have your baby. Like, I understand you would say yes to that. And
Yes.
there's no right and wrong. It's a journey and you learn,
Hmm.
and maybe in hindsight you would have gone like, oh, maybe I wouldn't have done that. But in the moment you said, you felt that was maybe feeling good and like you would progress and you trusted her and there. Yeah. So, I love that piece of wisdom. You being were you did you say you were you in your early 20s this time for your first?
Yes, I had just turned 21
Yeah.
with my first baby.
Oh, beautiful little maiden. Oh, so beautiful.
And
Tell
no
me more.
regrets.
No, no, I get you. I get you. Absolutely. There's no right and wrong.
Yeah. Well, my labor did pick up after that. And they said I could finally go in the birth tub because they didn't want me to go in too early. And oh, that was so wonderful. I remember getting into the water and just thinking that was heaven. But I also was very conscious that I didn't want my labor to slow down. And so for like 2 hours straight, anytime I'd have a contraction, I would stand up out of the water to let gravity kind of pull my baby down. And I'd lean on my husband or whoever family was there. My dad was there. I love my dad. He's been at most of my births, actually, which might sound weird to some, but his masculine energy has always been a protection for me. And so he's been pretty integral with some of my labors. And then my mother, of course. So yeah, every time I'd have a contraction, I'd stand up, breathe through it, moan through it. I'm very vocal, I've learned. And I just, the low moans, the horse lips, whatever I need to do to get through it. But it's so powerful. It's such a help for me. And then after the contraction would end, I'd just get back in the water and I'd relax until the next one. And by now it was like 6 or 7 a.m. I was getting pretty tired, but I just kept working with my baby. And I felt so connected to the spirit, my first baby. She was just a bright light my whole pregnancy. Um, it was very cool to be pregnant the first time. And eventually I stood up and I had a contraction and I just felt her wiggle into place and I knew it was time. Like that was essentially transition for me. And it wasn't crazy. I just like honed in.
Mm.
And I have a slight fear of water and birthing in water. So I chose to get out of the tub at that time. I didn't feel called to do that for that baby. And I went to the birth stool and my grandma checked me again. And I was at a 7. But I felt the urge to push. And she was like, if you feel that urge, then you just push. It didn't matter what centimeters I was at. She just trusted my body. And so I started pushing and I pushed, I have no idea. Time is irrelevant at this point, but I pushed for probably 10 to 15 minutes. And then my grandma, she has this position called the Diane Dangle. Her name is Diane, and the Diane Dangle is where two people stand on either side of you with one person behind you holding you up. And when you have a contraction, they lift you up and pull your legs to the side so gravity helps you. It's kind of intense. But I had seen her do it on my aunt who had just given birth 6 months before. So I knew what was happening. It sounds a little ridiculous, but it was very effective in helping me open up and not uh like constrict my body because it at this point it was very very intense. And so we did that position for about 30 minutes before I felt my baby start to crown. And I just remember feeling like I can't do this. This is so hard. I would describe it as passing through the shadow of the valley of death. That's the only phrase that I think encompasses what I went through. But like being surrounded by all my loving family who were just supporting me and saying, yes, you can do this. Like I never faltered. Like I felt like I might, but they helped me get through those hardest moments. And one more detail that is just so fun, I gave birth to this child in the same spot that my mother gave birth to me because I was her first child and she had it in my grandmother's living room. And then I had this baby in my grandmother's living room.
Mm. Wow, 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 wow.
Yeah. So generations of just mothers having babies at home. It's so special to me.
Yeah.
My grandma even put up a picture of Shakespeare's plays that had been hanging when I was born. Like she had rehung it up so it was the whole same layout again. Um, anyway, side note, but back to the baby. She was crowning, and I felt that ring of fire. Um, and then she came out, and my aunt, who's also a training midwife, checked for a cord. There was a cord. She just moved it over her head. And then they said, give one more push. And she came out into my aunt and my husband's arms. And they set me down and they put her on my chest. And it was so quiet. Everyone was just, taking in this baby. But and then my grandma was like, well, talk to your baby. And then everyone starts talking, hi, baby, hello, welcome. Like you did so good. Like it was just a chorus of loving family. And she started crying and she was pink and she was perfect. Just absolutely no issues there. And it was just unbelievable. I remember feeling like Superwoman, like flooded with these incredible hormones. I was like, I could do that again. Like that was awesome. Like, oh man, I just realized how powerful I was after that experience.
Yes, and
So,
that is what birth is here to show women. That is the design of birth. And this is why home birth and birthing naturally is so important,
mhm.
actually, for
Yes.
women and for just for humanity, for babies being born, but for humanity, for women to really wake up to their power. It's a wake up to your power.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's the biggest tragedy that more women will never experience that because no one can take away the knowledge of who I am, you know?
Exactly. And it's something that's so hard to convey to the masses who are so scared and who
Mhm.
believes in, the medical model of care and to be saved and to be numbed out and to
Yeah.
dissociate and this is the message that I wish that we could all just scream from the rooftops in like microphones, like they do when they call to prayer or something like this
Yes.
like just let's call it out over society.
I'm with you. No, I love sharing my home birth stories and I smile politely when women say, "Oh, I could never do that." But every now and again I feel inspired to say, "I bet you could, you know?"
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So,
What a beautiful story. So here you are, mama of one, and then when is the second one coming along?
so my periods were rather erratic after this baby, and unfortunately, they come back very quickly even while breastfeeding.
Mm.
So within 3 months, I got my first period, and then it was like 20 days later or 45 days later, but it wasn't a consistent period. And so within 6 months of my first being born, I was expecting again. And I was a little shocked at that with this one because it wasn't consciously planned. And my marriage was a little rocky at the time. And so I was a little nervous about bringing a baby into that situation. But within a month or two, I accepted it and was excited. I'll mention my first was a girl, and we named her Nova because she was our shining little spirit the whole pregnancy. And I had a feeling that this one would also be a girl. Um, Even though I had had that miscarriage and knew I would have a boy eventually, I just felt like this was my second daughter coming. And um, the marriage stayed pretty rocky throughout the whole pregnancy, but I knew I was going to have a home birth again. I worked with my grandma again, and I was going to have it at her house again, but this time I had it in her apartment. So not in the same room that I was born in, but in a different part of the house. And she was due December 17th, I think. Yes. And so right around Christmas time. And with this pregnancy, I started having those Braxton Hicks contractions about a month early. And so at first it kind of threw me off, like, oh, this baby's going to come this week. And then another week went by, and another week went by, and another week went by. And I was like, oh, this is so frustrating. Like, I was so done. I got very sick the week that I ended up giving birth. So I was congested, and one of my ears was plugged up, and I had a terrible cough, and I was so miserable. And the 17th passes, and then a whole week goes by, and we get to the 23rd of December, and I was like, oh no, I don't want a Christmas baby. I just don't want her to have, I don't know. Everyone I know who has had a Christmas baby, they just don't like their birthday. And so I was like, anyway, I ended up driving to my grandma's house on the 23rd, and she made me a castor oil drink with orange juice just to see. I was a week overdue of my guest date at that point, and so sick. I just was ready to be done. So I drank the drink, laid down for an hour so I wouldn't throw it up, and it cleared me out very quickly. I So it was a good experience for me to take that, and I felt like it was the right choice at the time. After I was cleared out, I had what felt like an hour long kind of cramp.
Mm.
It wasn't quite a contraction, it was just like a cramp, and it lasted for an hour. And so that was a good sign. And then a couple hours go by with sporadic contractions. And by 7 o'clock p.m., my grandma asked to check me. And I said, okay, because I wanted to know. Again, I I trusted what my grandma brought to the table as my midwife. But in later pregnancies, I refused checks because I just became very disillusioned with those. So, but she checks me, and apparently I wasn't even a 4 because she said, oh, you're not having this baby tonight. Go home and get some sleep. And I remember being so angry. Because I was having some contractions. And so I felt like something was happening, but everyone went home. And so we went home, and I was like, fine, I'm not going to have this baby tonight. I guess, just spiteful or petty or whatever. But we get home, and I'm like contracting every 10 minutes, and they're hard contractions. And I'm like, I'm just going to get in the tub and go to sleep. And so I'm having these contractions, and I guess I start moaning, but I'm laying down like I'm going to sleep. And my husband calls my aunt, who was the assistant midwife, and puts me on speakerphone so she can listen to the noises I'm making. And she's like, you need to come back right now. But I was so angry. I was like, no, I'm not going to go back. Like, I think I was just so fed up by the end of that pregnancy that I couldn't even really be reasoned with. But a contraction that was hard enough hit me, and I was like, okay, we better go. So we drive the 20 minutes back, and I'm like on my knees holding onto the back of the headrest of the car, contracting, rushing back to try to, just in case I'm about to give birth, because it felt like I was. They were pretty intense. But we got back there, and then they slowed down a bit again once I could relax. And another interesting point for this pregnancy is I had another aunt there. My grandma had 10 kids. Okay, so all of them naturally. My mother was the first one born at home, but she even had twins naturally in the hospital. She advocated very hard for that, which was very cool. Anyway, so I had an aunt there who was a videographer, and we were going to film this birth. And she'd been filming some of my prenatals, and we were going to do a little YouTube documentary about home birth. So there were a lot of lights set up, and lots of cameras, and there was a GoPro on my aunt's head who so that way everything could be filmed. It was a little bit more stark, but because it was still family, I don't remember it bothering me that it was a little bit more kind of sterile. But so I get back, everyone's setting up all this video equipment, and I just get in the tub because I'm laboring very hard. And at this point, I think it was about 8 or 9 p.m., maybe 10. My first birth was 12 hours from start to finish. And this birth from when I got back to my grandmother's house was 4 hours. And so I'm laboring in the tub. It got really hot. So I got out and they used one of those scarves around my belly. I'm forgetting the name of those.
Reboso.
Yes, the rebozo. And that was wonderful. That was so helpful. And let's see, let me get back.
What did they
So
do
there,
with the reboso? How did they use the reboso?
when I would have a contraction, they would pull on both ends of the scarf to put some pressure on my belly. Sometimes they would shake it, um, but it was just the pressure that helped with the positioning of the baby. I'm struggling to remember all the details. I just remember it being so helpful and one of my favorite parts of that labor.
Were you kind of on all four, so it kind of lifted a
Yes.
little bit and took some of the weight off probably as well?
Yes, I was on all fours a lot
Mm.
for that labor. And I remember using the birth ball a lot in between contractions. But with being sick, this was probably my most difficult labor experience. It got to the point where I was getting really close and I was going through transition because I remember feeling like I can't do this. There's no way I could have this baby. And I had that feeling with every single one, actually. But by the last one, I didn't vocalize it. I just noticed it
Mm.
and let it go. But with this one, that feeling was probably more intense than the first one, like that I couldn't do this. So I got on the birth stool and I have short legs. So I learned from the first one that I need one of those like squatty potty stools. And so I had one of those so I could have a little bit more grounding with this baby. And the bags were bulging and I was so sick. And I told them they could break the water because I was feeling the urge to push and the waters were bulging. So actually one of my grandma's assistants who has longer fingers than my grandma, because I didn't want my grandma doing checks on me anymore by that point, broke the waters. And then it was crazy. My baby was born within 10 minutes. And again, knowing what I know now, I maybe wouldn't have had them break my waters because it was so fast.
Mm.
But in high, like, I really just trusted. And I've learned so much through
Yeah.
all my labors and deliveries. And
Yeah, for sure. And when you said like, you were so sick, do you mean you were feeling nauseous or you were throwing up or you had to go to the bathroom? What do you mean with I was so sick?
my head was just swimming and from like this cold I had, like I couldn't hear out of one ear. And so I felt isolated almost from my own body. And I was coughing and the coughing was uncomfortable while trying to labor, like just very ill. Luckily, no nausea because I hate throwing up, but
Mm.
sick enough that I felt like I couldn't be as present with myself because of all the symptoms that I was experiencing. And actually, after I gave birth, I ended up having plugged ears for a whole month. Like it took me a long time to recover.
Yeah. Well, maybe a little side note, like, I understand you were feeling very kind of done,
Mhm.
but being sick is probably not the greatest time to kind of even kind of naturally wanting to induce yourself with a castor oil.
Mhm.
That itself is obviously a hit and miss. As you probably know, the
Mhm.
midwife brew with castor oil can just give you false labor and just make you feel really sick and vomit or like go to the toilet with diarrhea or whatever and actually not put you into labor. Um, and can give you harder labor experiences. But you were also feeling sick. That must have been like so hard to then have gone through kind of pushing your body into labor. Maybe she wanted to wait until you got better, and that's why you didn't have your baby by then.
It's hard to say. And there were a lot of like relational things going on at the time. So it was emotional and physical.
Mm.
And it happened the way it happened. I wish I do. That's probably the birth that I'll finish the story. And I hate to say regret because they were all learning experiences
Yeah.
and I value each of them. But it was the hardest at the very least.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Yeah. So after they broke my waters, it was a very intense ring of fire. And I'm they had to put the oxygen mask on me because I was sick and I wasn't breathing, getting enough oxygen. And it I almost felt out of body. Like it was so much bigger than myself. And this baby ended up being 2 pounds bigger than my first. And so that was also, it wasn't quite what I had was expecting, but it was also the same. It's kind of hard to explain, but she came very quick. And once the head came out, um, my aunt, who was the one helping catch, told everyone to be quiet because there was a lot of noise. There was a cord wrapped around the head. She removed the cord and then she checked and said, "We have a shoulder dystocia. We need to move off the stool and onto the bed." And the one interesting point with that is earlier in my labor, like 2 hours earlier, she had mentioned shoulder dystocia and how if that were to happen, we would go to the bed. And I remember her clearly saying that, and it like a vision of it flashed through my mind. Like, and so when she said shoulder dystocia once the baby's head was born, I was not scared at all because I had mentally prepared for that to happen. And so I stood up, they moved me just a couple feet over to the bed, laid me on my side. My dad helped lift my leg up. So uh, there was more access, and my grandma came and she helped release the baby, and the baby twisted out and was born. And it was just seamless. Everyone had a job and it happened very quickly. And I really wasn't scared when my aunt had mentioned it earlier. I felt like I had been prepared for that scenario to happen, and everything was completely fine. um anyway, so I guess I wanted to mention that part because my midwives were trained. They knew what to do, and it wasn't a real emergency. I mean, it was something that needed to be addressed, but it was never scary for me.
Yeah. Beautiful. And they don't have to be scary.
Mhm.
These, emergencies that can happen whether wherever you are, emergency, it doesn't have to be seen as that in a sense. If someone is skilled, midwifery skilled with her, hands, knowing how to do that,
Mhm.
it can be very seamless.
And I just love talking about my grandma, I guess, because she told me a story of her eighth son had shoulder dystocia, and it was just her and my grandpa, and she talked him through releasing the baby for her while she was giving birth. So, just she's an incredible, incredible woman, just amazing. So,
Wow.
yeah, my baby was born, placed on my chest. She was bright purple, covered in blood. There was a moment of scare because they thought I might be hemorrhaging. So my grandma's also master herbalist, and she gave me a tincture that might help stop bleeding. But luckily, it wasn't an actual hemorrhage. Everything was okay. It was just like 30 seconds of precaution. But um, yeah, so I had my baby, my second girl, and I will admit I felt a little more numb after this birth, a little more in shock with I think how quick it went, being sick.
Mm.
So I didn't have that same flood of hormones that I did with my first, but I was still very proud of having gotten it done. Just grateful that everything worked out in the end. So.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing all the details of that. And
Mhm.
it's just so much wisdom coming through, for you, obviously, for your next birth experiences, and for all of us now as we listen to this journey of yours as you are embodying more and more of this birthing goddess, this sovereign woman birthing her way. So, third one is a plot twist, isn't it?
Yes. And there are some interesting things in between my second and third. I ended up getting a divorce from my first husband just a couple months after that baby was born. And um, because it ties into midwifery, I ended up meeting my husband, my second husband, through one of the midwives that was present at my second birth. It was her son. So when she found out I was divorced, she said, well, I have a son that you should meet. And she's actually the one that broke my waters in the second story. And 6 months later, her son reached out to me because I was like, well, I'm a mom with two kids. So if he's interested, he's got to make the move. So he messaged me on Facebook and we were married only like 5 months later. It was kind of crazy, whirlwind romance, but um, I felt good having you know, being recommended by my mother-in-law means she must like me. So
Wow, that is so cool.
so 9 months after marrying my second husband, we consciously conceived. I felt like it was time for that boy to be born that I had been waiting on for a couple years. And we conceived right away. I've never had trouble getting pregnant. Luckily, that is not a trial I have to deal with in this life. Very smooth pregnancy. And I was planning on having a home birth, but because this was my husband's first baby, we decided to take a birth class through a midwife in the area who taught Bradley birth. And she geared that class to mothers who wanted a natural birth but might be having them at a hospital or a birth center, which is very common in my area. So it was a lot of hospital recommendations like how to push back or how to say no, or here's what Pitocin does, here's what a C-section does, here's what an ultrasound does. Just very stuff that I actually kind of knew from researching during my previous pregnancies, but I never felt applied to me, but ended up being extremely helpful because when I went into labor, I I thought I was a little early, like 38 weeks. I ended up being slightly earlier than that, but my water broke. And that was the first time my water broke before I went into labor. And so we hung out for 2 days with nothing really happening. Labor didn't start. And um, I have one aunt who's a little bit more medical focused, and she thought it might be time to go to the hospital. And my mother-in-law, who was my primary midwife for this baby, was like, no, we're just going to wait and see. But I think there were a lot of pressures happening because we did decide to do the castor oil again. Looking back, she and I agree we would have just waited, but there was a lot of family involved. And again, you learn lessons through every birth. So I took the castor oil drink, which did clear me out and did push me into labor. However, within an hour of contraction starting, I sat on the toilet and there was a lot of blood, a lot of clotted blood. And I had never seen something like that before. And so it actually scared me.
Yeah,
And I called my mother-in-law into the bathroom to look at it. And she immediately pulled out the Doppler to check baby. Baby sounded fine. So we moved to the bedroom and she did a vaginal check. And based on what she felt, she thought it might be an abruption. She thought she felt placenta. And so like it might have been closer to the lip than she realized, because I only do one ultrasound per pregnancy just to make sure the baby looks like it's developing okay, and then I don't do any more. I
so
do it
when
at about 20 weeks.
yeah, so you did the 20-week anatomy scan. So by that
Yes.
third pregnancy, when you did that, did you have a low-lying placenta at that time?
It wasn't brought to my attention during the ultrasound that I remember, but my mother-in-law wasn't exactly sure what was happening, but I was still bleeding. And so I could be misremembering, but I remember her saying we should go to the hospital at this point just to just to see what's going on because baby still sounded okay, but I I think we all felt like that was the right thing to do. Um, and it was a 30-minute drive to the hospital that I wanted to go to. It wasn't the closest hospital, but it was one that I felt would be better for our situation. And I was mentally preparing for a C-section if that was the right thing to do, if it was in fact an emergency situation. And luckily we get there, and it all kind of lined up amazingly because the doctor on call, it was, let's see, it was 11 a.m. or sorry, 11 p.m. when we got in. And the doctor on call, he only works the night shift once a week. But he checked me. We did the ultrasound. He did a vaginal check, and he said, I think this was just a partial placenta. Baby's stable. Everything looks okay. We're just going to monitor you and see what happens. And I was so grateful for that, because I worried that another doctor would have said, let's just have a C-section. And I would have gone with that unnecessarily. And this doctor was a little bit more willing to work with us. They did want to start Pitocin at level 1. And I agreed to that because I felt like it was important to have this baby quickly, in case I just was worried about a further abruption. And at the time I felt a lot of peace about it. And because I had taken that class, I felt like it was informed consent. So they started me at level 1. The contractions were consistent. There was a point where they didn't think I was making enough progress, so they wanted to, up the dose. And I said, no, we're okay. We'll just keep going at this. And I was able to stand up for myself very confidently. And so I was so grateful for this class that I took that really applied to the situation I ended up giving birth in. And I also agreed to the constant monitoring, which isn't something that I maybe would have wanted if I were to have babies in hospitals, but because of the risk situation, it actually brought me more peace to have the constant monitoring. So I labeled for a few hours, and this was also during COVID. So my mother-in-law came with me and my husband, but only 2 people were allowed in the room. And then they swabbed me, and I tested positive, apparently, for COVID. I had it during my pregnancy, but it was 3 months prior. And so I didn't understand why I tested positive, but they made my mother-in-law leave. So it was just me and my husband. And so, gosh, that was a whole other thing. But in the end, it was actually kind of sacred, because my husband really showed up for me after having taken that birth class. And I'm so sorry. My son woke up. Close the door right now. Thank you. Okay. I thought I'd be hidden here. Okay. Sorry. Let's see. So my husband from that class had been prepared perfectly to support me. He did all the back pressure. He was helping me with positions. He was just such an incredible birth partner. And so even though I had lost access to my family, which was kind of hard for me, having birthed with everyone previously, I felt so empowered and so connected to my husband. He really got me through that birth. And it ended up being very quick. The Pitocin I never let them go past level 1. And they wanted, let's see, it was like 4 a.m. by this point, and I was sitting on the hospital bed. It was raised up in like an L, and I was on my knees with my hands on the rails. And gosh, I just was laboring beautifully. Like, I felt so in touch with my body, despite the higher contractions with the Pitocin. Like, I just felt so aware of myself. And I remember the nurse coming in saying, I think I'd like to check you. And I was like, no, just give me a minute. And then I had a crazy contraction, loud moaning. She's like, I'm actually just going to go get the doctor. And everyone rushes in, and I tell them to lay down the hospital bed. No one was telling me what to do. I was just doing my thing. And I lay down on my side with my leg propped up, kind of how I had my second baby. And I tell my husband, grab my leg. And he's like, what? I'm like, grab it like this. Like, force him to hold my leg up properly. And I don't even remember being in transition but I know it happened. And then, like, within two pushes, my son just glided out like so smoothly. And I was in the hospital somewhere. I never thought I'd give birth, but I felt so empowered still. And so I was very grateful for that. And my son came and he was smaller than we thought. So he did have a NICU stay. Um, I had gone into labor a little earlier. They thought he was 36 weeks. So he needed a little bit help with his lungs developing. And that ultimately ended up being another blessing that we were at the hospital in the end because he was able to receive a little bit of assistance with a CPAP machine. And I think it all turned out the way it was supposed to with that birth. There were lots of things that were divinely inspired, I think, leading up to that point. So,
I love how you felt, as you said, empowered throughout
mhm,
this birth. And I really want to emphasize that because it actually really doesn't matter where you birth. It's how you
mhm,
feel, right? And it's how
yes,
you're treated makes a big difference. And
mhm,
also, like knowing, like you were really owning your birth.
mhm,
Every choice was informed, as you said, and you were in control. You knew what you wanted and didn't want, and you were advocating for that without, there was no um, hesitation. I think this is a key information that whether this, if you're listening right now, you're going to birth at home, birth center, hospital, if you ever end up in the hospital system or anywhere really, like if you just, every cell of you is like 100% sure of this decision that you're making, whether that is like, put the bed down, I'm going to be on all fours, or do this, do that. When you speak it from a place of like, just, this is what I want, like you're owning it, actually people around you will just respect that. It's
yes,
when you're wishy-washy, you're like, can I please do this? Oh, please, doctor, that kind of energy of like, I'd like this. But you're inviting them to say, actually, we don't want that. We want you this way. And I
yeah,
think this is key information that I can really hear from your story, that all the decisions were really coming from like a yes and a no place from you, listening to whatever they
yes,
were offering or whatever you wanted, and you were acting
mhm,
from that. And then that makes a good birth experience.
yes.
Hmm.
It turned out really well. And I think they must have given me a friendly nurse because she was completely on board with me having had home births. Because you never know. Sometimes that was probably my biggest fear, that I'd be surrounded by people that were very judgmental and critical of me. But everyone, at least the nurse they assigned me, was very friendly and uh, encouraging, very,
That's
and the
beautiful.
doctor as well. I think I got the one doctor that was just incredibly respectful of me and my decisions throughout the whole thing. So it all just felt like it lined up as best as it could have given the circumstances for
Yeah,
that birth.
beautiful. All right, let's dive on into your fourth now, shall we?
Okay. Baby number four was not consciously conceived. Again, I had those erratic periods that I just could not keep track of. And we had a mishap with a condom, and I conceived another baby. But she is an angel. I can't imagine our life without her. Very similar pregnancy. She was due in November of 2022. She also was a week overdue, past the guest date. But after my previous births, I said, no more castor oil. And I'd been listening to your podcast at this point. I listened with my son, the hospital birth, but you only had like 10 episodes out when I started listening. I must have been one of your first listeners because I zoomed through them in a couple days and I was like, oh, there's no more. Oh, what am I going to do? And so I found other podcasts or something. But so I listened to your podcast regularly with this baby and I was like, okay, I don't need the castor oil. It's okay if she comes like 2 weeks late. And it was just so comfortable. And my mother in law was my midwife again. And I'd say she's probably more in line with your style
Mhm.
because she was very hands off. Once I went into labor, again, I had a month of Braxton Hicks that were infuriating because I just never knew when it was going to happen. But 5:30 a.m. on the day she was born, I had my first contraction and I was like, oh, this is it. I know she's coming today. So I texted everyone and they slowly made their way over and I just labored casually throughout the day. This was my only daytime baby. which was very interesting because they all started at night, all my previous labors. And so this one started first thing in the morning, which was kind of fun. And so I was just hanging out. They filled up the birth tub. We were just listening to music, and I was eating like a chicken pot pie at my kitchen table. Like it just felt like so cozy and warm. And 2 o'clock comes around in the afternoon, and I'm like, I'm kind of tired. I think I'm going to go take a nap. And as soon as I lay down, my strongest contraction hits. And so I get in the shower for a minute, but they started coming pretty strong at that point. And so I make my way back downstairs, get into the birth tub, and I'm like, okay, I guess we're here. I have an hour of pretty strong laboring. And then I remember like feeling a bit of that need to push in the tub. And so I kind of tentatively start pushing, and there's so much pressure. And then my bag breaks in the water, and I felt that gush. And it was actually so magical to be able to experience that naturally. And I don't know, I just remember being, that's so cool. Like I would, that I just felt my water break in the tub, and like, I'm just doing this, and I'm just surrounded by people who love me. And I don't know, there's something that was so safe about that birth that I really appreciate. Um, and then when the pushing really started, I pushed a little bit in the tub, but I didn't feel called to have this baby in the water either. So I climbed out and I got on my hands and knees, and I was leaning on my husband, and my grandma was behind me, and my mother this time. My mother was there to help catch the baby with this one. And I remember having that transition feeling of, I can't do this. But again, I just had so many supporting voices saying, yes, you can do this, you're doing this. And I pushed her head out, and my mom tells me that her eyes were just wide open. She was just looking right at my mother, ready to come. I knew this baby was ready to be born. I had shoulder dystocia again. So my after a few pushes with her not making any progress, like my mother-in-law had been hands off. She wasn't really messing with anything, but then she did reach in and help move the shoulder out. And then she came right out into my mother's arms. They passed her up to me, and they got me the birth stool, and I just sat and held her. And I actually didn't know the gender of this baby. So I had thought she was going to be another boy. So it was kind of funny that she ended up being a girl. But the bigger surprise than that was she was born with 2 extra fingers and 2 extra toes, which is a genetic anomaly that runs in my family, but none of my previous kids had it. And so I actually sent you a picture of the face I made when I realized that she had extra fingers and toes, which was the bigger surprise than even her gender. So that was very fun.
Wow. Amazing. How quick was this birth?
This birth was a little longer. So I started first contraction at 5:30 a.m. She was born at about 4:19 p.m. So about 12 hours again.
Right. So quite steady. You were going through the whole day with your family there.
Yes.
Beautiful. And how lovely that your mom caught your babe. Or
yeah, she said it was very special that she, with her eyes open and everything, it was very impactful for her too. So
yeah, that's gorgeous. That's beautiful. We actually haven't really talked about like the placentas.
Okay, yes. And I even meant to talk about them. With my first, I hadn't done any research. And so I didn't end up keeping the placenta with my first. With my second, I froze it, intending to plant it, but I went through a divorce right after. And so I ended up not doing anything with that placenta either. And with my third, I was in hospital. And so with all the craziness of that birth, I didn't keep that one either. But with this one, I finally kept it. And this one I had encapsulated. And so I was able to take this one after the fact. But I remember being in awe after my first birth. I was able to look at every placenta. Even in the hospital, they showed it to me, and I got to appreciate the beauty of it. It's just an incredible life-giving, organ, essentially. I have a lot of beauty and respect. In fact, I wore my Tree of Life necklace that reminds me of birth and placentas and the beauty of them. So,
Mm, beautiful. Yes, I love it too. And I feel like it needs as much reverence as the birth of the baby.
mhm.
Yeah, beautiful. So now let's dive on into your fifth. That was actually not too long ago. It was this summer in June, July
Yes.
sometime.
July 4th is when this baby
July.
was born. So I have a Christmas Eve baby and then a 4th of July baby. So lots of holidays. um, let's see. So again, I had 2 months of Braxton Hicks with this baby. So it was very crazy making for me, not knowing when I was going to go into labor, and the guest date versus the ultrasound date. There was some discrepancy between when she might come. And so and I also did not feel like I should have this baby at home. And so I was planning on either traveling to my grandma's house, and she had moved, so she was about 2.5 hours away, or to my mother-in-law's house. Um, and whoever I gave birth with would be the one that kind of managed the labor, I guess, or the delivery. So it was all kind of up in the air. And at this point, I was past my guest date. And so I was like, whatever, we're just going to go visit my grandma for the weekend. It was 4th of July weekend. We're going to have a good time. And the baby's probably not going to come. So we just packed up our bags and went to visit my grandma. And I should add, my parents were living with my grandma. So they were all kind of in the same spot. So we get there, we unpack, and we sat down to have a game night. My dad and my brothers play Magic the Gathering, and my husband plays as well. And so I've been playing for years with them, and we all sat down to have a game. And everyone was just being so funny. My brothers were cracking jokes, and everyone was kind of teasing each other, and they were making me laugh so much that I started having contractions like every 20 minutes. I was like, hey, you guys need to stop or I'm going to go into labor. Like, stop being so fun. Like, it was just a wonderful night, me with all these guys that I love so much. 11:30 p.m. rolls around and everyone goes to bed, but I'm still having these surges. And I was in a little bit of denial, like, I don't know if this is it, but this feels real. But I've been having Braxton Hicks for weeks and weeks and weeks. And my husband and I went to bed and we were just talking, and we were able to make love one more time. And he falls asleep at 1 p.m. and I get my first real contraction that I no longer doubt this is labor. And so so I text my mother-in-law and I say, hey, I think this might be it. And again, we're 2 hours away from where my mother-in-law lives. So she's like, hey, we'll just keep watching it, keep tracking it. They come consistently every 15 minutes. And so within an hour, she's like, hey, I'll pack up and I'll head over. And so I'm just awake. Everyone's asleep. And I just decide to go up into the living room and I put on some instrumental music and I just try to flow with it. But within 30 minutes, I'm like, I can't do this alone anymore. And so I wake up my grandma and I say, Grandma, I am in labor. And, like, she's like, wonderful. I'll start getting ready. And then I go wake up my dad. And I'll add, my mother was out of town on a trip, and we were hoping the baby would wait until she got back, but she missed it by one day. So I wake up my dad and I say, Dad, I need you to clean out the tub because I'm in labor. And I even have a contraction right next to him. And he's like, okay, this is real. He hops out of bed and he starts cleaning the tub. And I give my husband just a little bit more time because I know that he'd been up late with me before I finally wake him up. And so everyone's just kind of rushing around, getting everything ready. And I'm just in the zone. I'm just listening to this music. I'm going with the flow, but things are progressing very quickly. And I tell my husband, okay, you need to fill up the tub. And I even get in when it's only halfway full because like I know this baby's coming. And it was hard because my mother-in-law wasn't there yet. And I had really wanted her to be there for whatever reason for this baby. But this baby had other plans. In fact, I'd say this birth was almost baby driven more so than me being in charge of anything. This baby was, I could tell she was running the show. There, when I had my first contraction, she was kicking for like an hour straight. Like she was making it happen. You know, it's my time to come. So I'm laboring in the tub. And another thing I'll add is I was listening to your podcast again, the whole pregnancy, and every water birth story hit me a little different than it had previously. And I just had this sense that this baby wanted to be born in the water. And I had never felt that way with any previous children. And so I was planning on doing a water birth. My grandma isn't the biggest fan of water births. That's her own opinion, but she was supporting me in it. You know, she was like, great, do what you need to do. And she was very hands off too. No checks. You know, they just used the Doppler and the baby like the one time, make sure everything was good. But otherwise, I was just in the tub with my husband. And my dad was bringing me things like applesauce or drinks. And within 15 minutes of being in the tub, like I was pushing. And again, I just felt so in tune with my body. I was just so aware. Like I could feel my cervix opening and expanding. And I just felt so feminine and so, granted, a little out of control because I felt the baby was making it happen, but it wasn't a bad thing. It was like, okay, I guess we're not waiting for anyone. It's just us. um, and again, I'm moaning through the contractions. And I remember feeling the transition period of, I can't do this, but it was just a single thought. I noticed it and I was like, I can do this. I've done this 4 times. I'm about to do it a 5th time. I'm more in touch with myself than I've ever been. And so I didn't even verbalize it this time where I had previously. And so my husband later told me he wasn't even aware I was going through transition because I didn't say anything. I just lived it. And I thought that was pretty cool too. Just a marker of the transformation that I've had through all my pregnancies and deliveries. So,
Wow.
so I start pushing. I'm in the water and I put my hands up and said, I need people. So my husband comes up, I grab him with one hand, and my dad comes up, I grab him with the other hand. And my grandma's just off to the side, just witnessing, and I'm pushing this baby out. And then I could feel her starting to crown. So I moved back where my legs, where I was kind of back on my tailbone, my bum kind of, and my legs were open because I wanted to try to catch this one. That was another thing that I had never really done before, and I wanted to experience that. But I couldn't really see. My torso is long and my legs are short, and so I'm kind of oddly proportioned, but her head comes out and my husband is there. And he says, the head's out. And I'm like, and so I give one more push and she's born into the water. And I reached down, he and I reached down together, and I realized that she is in the sack. That my water hadn't broken. Excuse me. My water didn't break. She was born uncall. And my husband later told me that he could see that she was still in the sack, but he just thought that was cool. But he didn't think to say anything out loud to me. He just was like, oh, that's kind of cool, you know, but he didn't realize how unique that might be. So I didn't get any pictures of it essentially because it was just me and 2 people. And I had a birth photographer that could have come, but it all happened so fast that no one made it. So, but I at least got to see her and call before I picked her up. The sack broke over her head. I moved it all off her head, and I just brought her to my chest, and it was just magical. It was just so sacred and incredible. It felt close to unassisted. It was so hands off. It felt like it was just me and my husband and my dad, who I mentioned earlier, but he is just an incredible man. Like I felt so safe with both of those men there for my birth. And I'll add, my brother was in the background, not in the room, but he was helping get some stuff together. And I remember saying, it feels like Christmas morning. And it really did. It was just an incredible, incredible birth. And I feel like I brought that baby into the world the way she needed to be born, you know?
Wow. Yes, Uncle, that is so, so beautiful and so special. And what a gentle transition for baby to be in intact sac in the waters, in her sacred waters, coming out in that into water and just gently
Yes.
being lifted out by her mother. And that's how she comes into the world. What an absolute blessing of a birth.
And if for anyone into astrology, she's a Cancer sun and a Scorpio moon. So very water themed for this baby.
Amazing. And an Independence Day baby, so a little rebel.
Yes. And we ended up naming her Stella. So all of my girls have names that have to do with light. And that's been a very unique, wonderful theme for all my children as well.
Beautiful. Did you end up birthing your placenta in the bath as well?
No, I did get out after that point. I sat in the water for about 5, 10 minutes before my grandma asked me to get out so she could check me. The water was pretty red. And I had no problem with that. I felt like I'd had my moment. So we just moved to the birth stool and I birthed the placenta there. All my placentas come within like 10 minutes naturally. With no needed extra effort or anything. And so that was very smooth as well. And the placenta looked wonderful. And this one, I did end up freezing so that way I can plant it on our property that we bought this last year. And so I feel like I finally had the chance to utilize my placentas with the last two the way I wanted to. But I wanted to pass this placenta onto our land so that way we're going to plant it under a fruit tree. And I just want to bring more life with it. So
I love that. I love that so much.
yeah.
Giving the placenta back to the earth. Beautiful. Wow.
Another fun surprise is this baby was also born with the extra fingers and toes. So I now have two babies with the extra digits on their hands and feet.
Wow.
So it's been a fun thing for my family. We call them our little alien babies. So
Oh, wow, that's special. That's very interesting.
Mhm.
Wow, what incredible birth stories. Are you gonna have more babies?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Beautiful. Well, I'm guessing we'll hear from you again then. But before we wrap up, if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
I would say get informed, take a birth class if you can, a more naturally minded one that can set you up for success. And I know not everyone has this opportunity, but if you know anyone who's pregnant ahead of you that you trust and they trust you, that would allow you to be a witness of their birth, I think that was probably the most impactful thing that I did was witness birth before giving birth. I think that was the most influential thing. And then, of course, cultivate your intuition however you can. I recognize that that is a lifelong process. And in my circumstances, it took several births for me to truly sink into that for myself. But do what you can while you can. And your intuition will lead you down the path that you need to go on.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that so much. Oh, thank you for coming and sharing your rich birthing wisdom, and I can't wait to have you back.
We're planning on next year trying again. So as long as my periods don't get erratic like they did before, I have a pattern. So we'll see.
You do, who knows? Well, it's been absolutely lovely. Such a pleasure to learn from your beautiful stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. After listening to your podcast for the last several years, it's an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.